Hey, I'm Ugo Chiloka, and you're watching KHOU 11 Plus. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and for the next hour, we're taking a closer look into this issue. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience physical violence by their partner at some point in their lifetime. But domestic violence isn't just physical. It's described as a pattern of abusive behavior in a relationship used by one partner to gain or maintain power over the other. This can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, psychological, and technological, and it can happen to anyone, regardless of their age, sex, race, or social status. We do have a panel of experts joining us today to discuss this further, but first, we're going to hear from 2 parents who lost their daughter to domestic violence back in October of 2020. They spoke with our Stephanie Simmons and described the moments that led up to their daughter's death.
She was looking at the monitor, and I asked her about that, and she said she wanted to see if he had come back. And so I said, okay, well, you do that. I'm going to run to the restroom real quick. I went into the restroom, and as I did, he pulled back the shower curtain. He was hiding in the bathtub in the shower. He pulled back the shower curtain, pulled a gun on me, and told me he was going to kill us both. Somehow, I don't really know, but I fought with him, got him out of the bathroom. We fought through the door, and after a few moments, it seemed like longer, but after a few moments, he left. And I heard Savannah scream. I heard gunshots. I left the bathroom. I tried to get out the front door to get to their neighbor, who was a DPS officer. I fell a couple of times, but I finally did. And he came with a weapon. And as he came out of his house and headed toward their house, he was driving off in the truck, in the Savannah's truck, and he just ran. We went back, and he had shot Savannah several times. We called, he started CPR, we called 911, and they took her to the hospital, and she died that day.
I know this is just such an emotional story for you to have to relive, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. I do want to ask, in the interest of helping others out there who may be victims of domestic violence, were there initial signs that you were worried about with this man? Did he exhibit any certain sort of behavior that was concerning to you?
He did. As I said, it was the control issues. He wanted to know where she was all the time, even at work. It ended up, as it escalated, he was tracking her phone, so he knew where she was. If she was on the cemetery grounds at work, or, sometimes she had to leave for different things. He had placed voice recorders in their home to record conversations. There was some isolation. Anytime they became friends with another couple in the neighborhood, it would be fine for a couple of months, and then they wouldn't be seeing them anymore. And he always gave some excuse that they had done something.
And Michael, from a father's standpoint, what impact would you say this has all had on your family moving forward?
Oh, it's tragic. He always caused division. He would try to pit us against our daughter, or our daughter against us, and the ripples in the pond is still going to this day. Having to have police in our driveway, in our front yard, for over 2 weeks when he was out on the run. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew what he was going to do. And living in fear and having to explain to these children that, yes, that's their father, but they need to be afraid of him because of what he's done, and we don't know what he's going to do next. That's tragic for children. It's tragic for the family. It's hard to live with, but that's behind us now. We've adopted the children. My wife is safe. The children are safe, and we're trying to move forward.
And you're working on that next chapter. And one of the things you're doing since your daughter's passing, you've been working to help raise awareness and help survivors of domestic violence. Can you tell us more about that and the event happening this weekend?
Will be our 4th annual. All funds raised, proceeds, are split between Bay Area Turning Point, which is a women's, not women's only, but a family crisis center, raising awareness on domestic violence and fighting sexual assault. And the Disciple Oaks, the Savannah Memorial Fund Scholarship Fund at Disciple Oaks Retreat Center in Gonzales, Texas.
Yeah, again, this Sunday is the 4th annual Savannah Memorial 5K. The event raises money to support survivors of domestic violence and the Savannah Memorial Scholarship Fund. You can watch Steph's full interview with Michael and Shirley today on KHOU 11+. And joining me now is our panel of experts here, all in their purple for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We all understood the assignment here. So we have a wonderful panel here of people who are really going to explain the importance of understanding domestic violence awareness. First, we'll start with Maisha Coulter. She is the Chief Executive Officer with ABDA. Maisha, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here. And then we have psychotherapist Jasmine Boone. Jasmine, it's going to be really touching base on the emotional aspect and other things too. Jasmine, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have Amy Smith. Amy, we appreciate you being here with us today, who is also going to be sharing your insight as an expert. Now we'll discuss the legal fight for abuse victims, the mental health side of this, and resources available. But before we get started, be sure to text us if you have any questions to 713-528-1111. We'll be here answering viewer questions in about 30 minutes, so stick with us. Amy, let's begin with you. You can tell us a little bit about your organization and your background. Now, we just heard this heartbreaking story this family went through. Can we talk about how domestic violence affects everyone? There's all kinds of backgrounds that are affected by this. Can we start there first?
Sure. The Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, one of the things that we do is facilitate the Adult Violent Death Review Team. So we review all the domestic violence homicides that happen in Harris County. And a couple of things that we found, which were so true in this story, is the most dangerous time is when a person leaves, because the abuser's losing power and control. And it's really difficult if you tell the abuser you're going to leave. The best thing to do is to create a safety plan to leave and not let the abuser know that you are that you're planning to leave. That you have you make places where you're where you're safe. It might not be your parents' house. It might be some other place that the abuser doesn't know about where you're going to be. But to take precautions and to take measures to gather all your important documents to make sure that you have everything for yourself and for your children so that you can get out. Find resources. There are resources that are available. There's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. There's several resources here in Harris County. Talk to someone. Discuss what is the best way for you as an individual to get out, because everyone's different.
Yeah, these all really good points, and a big question I always hear from people who know those going through it: how do they get out safely? You know, what if some of them have tried to leave, been found? What can they do surrounding that? I'm sure there's a lot of fear.
Well, you can reach out to the different resources in the area. You can go to a shelter if the shelters are full. Like I said, find somebody that the abuser doesn't know that you can go stay with. It might be out of town. It might be with your relatives that live out of state, or somebody that he or she doesn't know where to find you. And it's also, if you're helping someone, the most important thing is to believe them, because it's really important. A lot of times we hear, oh, he couldn't have done that, or she couldn't have done that, because that's just not who they are. You don't know these people, and you're not inside their home, and that's what's really important. Is they might be great on the outside, and they might look like, oh, the guy that always helps you move, the girl that always picks up your kids, stuff like that. but you don't know what's going on inside. So believe the victim, and just to be there to support them through whatever they need at that time.
Supporting them, that's the key takeaway from that. And Jasmine, we want to talk to you with your therapist background in terms of how domestic violence essentially can impact someone's mental health.
Oh my goodness. The longer you stay in a domestic violent situation or relationship, the more it chips away at your self-worth, your ability and your willingness to trust yourself, your ability and your willingness to trust others, right? So it kind of, you become a shell of who you were, right? And that makes it even more difficult to leave the person that you're with, because I don't know who I can trust. You know, a lot of support and family members have either judged me for this, for staying in this, and so I don't think I can go to them. So it really chips away at how you see yourself, how you see the world, and how you believe the world perceives you.
All really good points. And you know, you also deal with, I guess, childhood trauma. So if maybe these children are watching their parents, you know, have a domestic violence relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk to us about that aspect? How can it can travel into adulthood essentially watching that?
Absolutely. So as someone who specializes in trauma and relationships and singlehood, like all of this encompasses what I do, right? And so people don't recognize this because they see their 2-year-old can't speak and can't articulate how it's impacting them. But as far as trauma is concerned, ages 0 through 7, these children are most susceptible to like negative impact. So even though they're 6 months, even though they're just 5 years old, it really impacts them. And that 6-year-old turns into a 16-year-old, turns into a 26-year-old, a 56-year-old. And if that is not addressed and processed at some point in their life, there's an implosion. Rather, all of that trauma goes to an organ, or there's an explosion, right? Unless we have some type of meltdown, or we have some type of impact outwardly. Also, it's going to impact how we choose our mate subconsciously, whether we recognize it or not, and how we behave in those relationships. Yeah. So it grows up with you.
Definitely has effects later on too. And Maisha, we want to turn to you now. Sure. You know, Harris County officials have called domestic violence an epidemic in our area. I think I was reading a report just this morning actually where the former police chief with the Houston Police Department, Troy Finner, mentioned about 18% of homicides were domestic violence related in just Houston alone. Yes. So what are the numbers? What are we seeing when it comes to this being widespread?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is an epidemic. It's a public health crisis when it comes to fatalities in our community, particularly in Harris County. We lead the state in regard to domestic violence homicides. And that has been consecutive years of us leading the state. Yes, we are the largest county in the state, but even with that, proportionally, we're unfortunately too high in terms of the incidence. One of the things that is happening and continues to happen is post-COVID factors, stresses that we saw when COVID happened, I think continue to resonate in households where domestic violence is already happening. So high levels of stress around economics, high levels of stress around health issues, and those things contribute to the behavior that persists and the choices that people who are choosing to have domestic violence, and it is a choice because no one should be choosing to behave in a way in a relationship with someone that they love. When we talk about those different choices that they're making, whether it's physical violence, sexual violence, economic abuse, those are things that they can control, but because of how they feel internally, they are asserting that level of control on their partners because they're out of control. And that's really at the core of what's happening with people who are perpetrating domestic violence. It is an out of control feeling for them that they assert outwardly on their individual partners.
I'm glad you mentioned that because too many times you hear victims blaming themselves for their abuser's behavior.
Sure.
And you just said it, it's a choice to behave that way, not the victim's fault.
Absolutely. And to that extent, a lot of victims stay in these relationships because they're being protective of their abusers. These are people who they are partnered with, they have children in common. If they bring it to someone's attention, whether it be law enforcement or work situation, they know that it might have a negative impact on their abuser. So they may lose their job, they may get arrested. And so they become protective of the person who is harming them the most. And that is part of the cycle of abuse that we see. The people who are in these relationships, they want the behavior to stop. They do not want to necessarily leave their abuser, and they don't know how to help assist them with changing that behavior in the abusive partner. But lots of people don't know that there are resources out there in that regard as well. ABDA, we are a BIP provider. BIP stands for Battering Intervention and Prevention Program. We have the largest BIP in the state of Texas, and it is an opportunity for individuals who've been identified as perpetrators of domestic abuse in their intimate relationships to have psychoeducation and interventions to help them cope and make better choices in their relationships. So that's an opportunity for a resource that lots of people don't know exists, but it does.
Good information, Aisha. And I want to get into the signs to look for anyone. They can jump in here, but what are some of the signs really when it comes to domestic violence that you'll notice red flags right off the bat? Yeah,
one of the things that happens pretty frequently in these kinds of relationships is high levels of jealousy, high levels of power and control in regard to the relationships that people have outside of that intimate partner relationship. So when you see someone who was social, who was going to family events, or who was attending certain activities, and then they start to pull back and retreat, and their reason for doing that is their relationship. The partner doesn't want them to go to this thing, or, you know, at first they're so in love that this is the only person that they want to be around. And that exclusiveness to some degree is an indicator of something else going on. When you start to change who you are and how you function socially, that's a sign that things are not right. And if someone is asking you or telling you that they don't want you around your other relationships, your parents, your friends, your work relationships, they are questioning all of those things, that is one of the initial red flags that gets ignored and translated sometimes to the survivor, the abused person, that, oh, this person just really loves me so much and they just want to be with me all the time. But if it's at the exclusion of others and if it's at your detriment, then it should be questioned.
Amy, do you want to chime in there?
Well, I think one of the things that Jasmine touched on too earlier was when she was talking about growing up in an abusive relationship. What we have found is that a lot of times some of our survivors don't realize they're in an abusive relationship because that's all they've known. So one of the things at the coordinating council that we've done is we've kind of flipped how we talk about domestic violence. We start out all of our presentations with what is a healthy relationship? Because how can you have a healthy relationship if you don't know what it is? But again, going back to some of what the red flags are, I think Maisha touched on, the extreme jealousy, the isolation. I mean, there could even be financial abuse where, hey, don't worry about it, your credit's better than mine. Let's get a credit card in your name. But don't worry, I'll pay for it. Or let's buy a house, or let's buy a car. And then you're stuck. Because we all know it's expensive to live here in Houston, and trying to get out of a relationship when you don't have any money, saved, because it's just not possible to do that, it's very difficult to leave a situation. I think the question should be not why does she stay, but why does he do why do they do what they do? Because that's really important. But again, when you're asking why does a person stay, you could be signing their death warrant, because as we've seen, that it happens over and over again. And as you see, y'all report on the news all the time, estranged husband, separated. There were some issues in custody pickups or child pickups and things like that. So it's really important to make sure that we don't blame the victim, because we don't blame the victim of a bank robbery. We don't blame the victim that's the victim in that a DWI person hit. We don't blame them, but we seem to be blaming the victim in a domestic violence case, but it's not their fault. So we really need to shift how we speak about domestic violence, and we need to put the blame where it is, and we need to hold those offenders accountable, because they're the ones that are causing these issues. It's not the victim. So just be very careful in your language when you're talking about a victim, because what we want is we want a victim to become a survivor, and then we want them to become a thriver, and we want them to move through that, because there is life afterwards, and we want to make sure that folks know that this is not, that you might be in it right now, but there's good times afterwards, and get help, get therapy, get whatever you need to do to move past this, because you have the rest of your life and you have your children's lives.
Yeah. Stop the victim blaming, that's for sure. And Jasmine, we just got a question that came in, and one of the viewers that asked us wanted to know, is there a personality type that folks can look for when it comes to an abuser?
I think it's interesting. We know what the red flags are and the signs are, like once somebody has been in the domestic abuse issue for a while, but it's so important to pay attention to the person's personality when you're first dating, date 1, date 2. If they're not allowing much space for you, that's a telltale sign, right? Whether it's going to end up being psychological abuse, physical abuse, financial. And what I mean by if they're not allowing enough space for you, if they're like, I know you like those pants, but I don't like those. Right? I don't like you to wear that much makeup. Don't put that much makeup on, right? Or, even for a woman, like, I hate that shirt on you. You're not creating space for that person. Maybe you really like Latin dancing, and they're like, I don't really, there's no space for you, right? That is something to start looking for. Even on a first date, if they are more likely to choose a date that is solely beneficial for them. Hey, why don't you come over and we'll play a game? I don't know you. I don't know that I'm safe, and this is not gender specific, right? It would make more sense for us to go to a neutral space where we can just kind of get to know each other. There is no money spent if I come to your house, right? I don't know if I'm safe, right? So paying attention to, like, is there some reciprocity? Is there space for me? In these situations, you start seeing personality, especially if they try to get you off the market quick, right? I want you, you're just such a good person. Let's take this another step. There's telltale signs that if you are paying attention and you're not more focused on getting in the relationship more than getting in a healthy relationship, that you will be able to see and walk away from.
And also, a lot of abusers sometimes look for people that have low self-esteem, that have maybe been in a bad relationship before, whether it was abusive or not. But they are drawn to people that have issues that may or may not be. They might not be self-confident. They might feel that they need to be taken care of or something like that. So they kind of hone in on some of those people. But I always like to say domestic violence is like an abuser's like when you go to a job interview. Because when you go to a job interview, you're putting your best foot forward, you're doing everything you're supposed to do, and you're great. And then you get the job, and then you get settled in the job, and then that's kind of how the relationship is. Because let's face it, nobody that goes to a job interview is going to show, if I walk in and hit you, okay, you're not getting the job and you're not getting a relationship. Right, exactly. So exactly.
And we wanted to touch base on how this doesn't just affect women. There's a stereotype that only women, or a lot more women, are affected by this, but we're seeing numbers in reference to men also being affected by this. Can we touch base on that a little?
Sure. Yeah, both genders are vulnerable to domestic violence happening to them. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men. And statistically, that's a pretty substantial number for both genders, regardless to the circumstances of the relationship. I can tell you that I've seen a number of more men coming out and speaking up and saying that they're in a domestic violence relationship than it used to be. And I've been in this industry doing this work for more than 20 years. I've represented a number of males now in divorces when they are the abused partner. oftentimes what I have seen, and this is anecdotal, it's not some statistic, but I do see a lot of times when men are the abused partner, so too are the children. When that is happening, and that's not necessarily the same when the abuser is a male. Although all children who are in homes where domestic violence is occurring, that is a level of abuse. But what I mean by that, there's also physical abuse directed toward children when the female is the perpetrator, in my experience. That being said, the impact on abused people is generally more statistically relevant for women, meaning that women die in these relationships more than men would. There's probably a physicality issue where a woman might be physically abusive, but for the most part, men are able to defend themselves in ways that women may not necessarily be able to defend themselves when they are being physically abused by the opposite gender. Certainly same-sex relationships, male-to-male relationships, domestic violence is happening. Female-to-female relationships, domestic violence is happening. So it is happening where there are human beings in relationships.
And Maisha, just to stay on you real quick, in terms of the legal process for victims who want to press charges against their abusers, we've seen it time and time again where some file a restraining order, they break it, and the woman still gets hurt, and then they get discouraged from doing it again and quit the process. What are their rights?
Yeah, so you have both criminal and civil rights as it relates to domestic violence. On the criminal side, obviously, if you are being assaulted or physically abused or threatened with harm, there are crimes that are being perpetrated in those instances, and you have the right to obviously seek recourse, meaning calling law enforcement. Law enforcement then has the opportunity to take that evidence and present it to the DA's office, and generally speaking, the DA office is who's going to prosecute, whether it be a misdemeanor assault, family violence assault, a misdemeanor to a felony. It could be a strangulation case. But there are cases that are being prosecuted every single day in our county and all over the state of Texas related to domestic violence. So those are your legal rights. If you have been if a stranger were to come and assault you, hit you, or do something, you would, in most instances, call the police and get some type of legal intervention. We do not do that in domestic violence situations, as I already articulated. Part of it is being protective of the person who is abusive. This is the person who's supposed to love you. But that, to me, is more offensive than a stranger. If you are professing to love someone, care about them, care about their well-being, but then you're harming them in a way that is criminal, then that is offensive, and we should take action, and the victim should. In addition to the criminal legal rights that they have, you have a lot of civil legal rights. ABDA represents individuals in family court. We do the second most protective order representation besides the DA's office in Harris County. So we are taking people into court and we're seeking civil protective orders. Lots of people call them restraining orders. They are not restraining orders in our state. They're called protective orders. Restraining orders are something that is also a part of lawsuits here in Texas. They're usually filed when there is a divorce happening, where there's a child custody case happening. And what a restraining order for us in Texas means is that you're restrained from doing certain things. So you can't turn off the lights in the house or take the money out of the bank account while the divorce is pending. Wow. So that is a restraining order, not the same as a civil protective order. Civil protective orders allow the victim to have exclusion from that perpetrator. So that means the perpetrator can't go to their house. They can't go to their place of business. They can't go to the children's school if a civil protective order is granted for a victim. They are protected from that person coming around them in places and spaces where they may need to be. In addition to that, if someone violates a protective order, then they actually can be charged with a crime of violation of a protective order, and it has some pretty serious consequences, to include spending up to a year in jail for violating a protective order.
Yeah, and Amy, when it comes to your clients, hearing some of their legal options, making sure they know about that too. How important is that when it comes to, obviously they're getting shelter, but the next step, right, in terms of making sure their abusers are paying the price, is that information helpful?
Yes, and I will say, because we do work closely with law enforcement, that over the years, the law enforcement response to domestic violence has changed. They've become a lot more receptive to filing the charges, to listening, to believing. Back in the day, they used to say, oh, just like, let's separate the parties. You go here. We won't worry about filing charges. Well, now they're filing charges. If the police come, they should make a report. Most law enforcement agencies have a policy to call the district attorney's office to see if charges are going to be filed. What's really important to remember in filing charges, it's not the victim versus the offender. It's the state of Texas is prosecuting the offender for breaking the law and against the state of Texas, and the victim is the witness in the case, or they're the complaining witness in the case. But it's not the survivor versus the offender. It's the state of Texas is prosecuting because the state of Texas broke a law that you cannot harm another person, that you've caused pain to another person, and so just remember, it's the police are there to protect. They have both the HPD and the sheriff's office and Pasadena Police Department and all these police agencies around town have beefed up their family violence units, their sexual assault units. They're investigating more and more cases.
The number's growing.
They're getting more calls. Last year, according to the DPS crime report, there were over 50,000 calls to calls for service in Harris County on domestic violence. Wow. And those are the ones that are reported. Right. And so what we do know is that domestic violence is an underreported crime. But what we also know is that if someone called the police, called 911, or a bystander called 911 because they saw something that was happening, that is not the first time that this is probably happening. Yeah. And just because they called today and that was a misdemeanor that occurred doesn't mean a felony didn't occur the night before or the 2 days before. So you have to look at, because as you said at the beginning, it's a pattern of abuse, and it's a long-standing pattern, and it's not just a one-off kind of thing.
Yeah. And Jasmine, when we talk about some of the actual victims getting to the point where they're strong enough to press charges, they're ready to do it. They're no longer back and forth with it, because we see that a lot, right? They kind of tussle with it. When they get strong enough, they get the support to go through with it, and they get through, and they're starting that process. What's the mental toll that can, play on their minds essentially when they're doing that?
It's scary. Yeah. It's scary because my life is about to completely change, right? I've arrived to a space where I don't want this abuse anymore, but for anybody, whether you're experiencing abuse or not, uncertainty is scary for anyone. What is my future going to look like? If you have children, what will my children's future look like? So there is a lot of emotional toll. Again, who I was before entering the relationship is not who I am now. So I'm going to have to get to know myself. I might have been ostracized from my family and my support system. So I'm going to have to get to know them again. And there's a lot of shame I now carry that I may not have had as much of before entering this relationship. So first thing first, you heal however you choose to heal, but I would strongly suggest a therapist because you're different. You've gone through abuse, and you probably now have PTSD. And so years sometimes of therapy to kind of rebuild who you are, because it does take a mental toll.
How does therapy help in that aspect?
So I think it helps connect the dots, right? So as you absolutely are a victim, it helps you recognize what are the patterns and what are the roles I played in co-creating this, right? Is there a part of me that felt unworthy? And so I was attracting people who were kind of sensing that from me, right? It connects the dot as like, am I subconsciously attracted to a person who is a lot like my father? Maybe my father was abusive, or maybe my mother was abusive, right? And so you start to connect the dots so that you can dismantle the patterns and start ushering in what you truly deserve in a healthy relationship.
All good points, Jasmine. We appreciate it. We just got a question actually that came in, and the viewer's asking if abusers typically have mental illness. Are you able to speak to that? Really, anyone can join in, but we wanted to start with Jasmine, she's a therapist.
If we're speaking mental illness in terms of more of acute disorders, bipolar, schizophrenia, the big ones that we think about when we think mental illness. I don't know that there is a correlation that like it's only these mental illnesses. A lot of times it is just broken people.
Oh, wow.
A lot of times it's just broken people. Abandonment starts to play a role, right? And so if we talk about the cycle of domestic abuse, where we kind of have this upturn of like tension in the house and that type of thing, and you're paying attention to that, and then we have the actual act, and then we have the kind of making it right, and oh, let me take you on a date, and that type of thing, and then this calm. The abuser is doing that because they don't want you to abandon them, right? And I've messed up again, and my brokenness has shown up in a physical way, and now I'm fearful of abandonment. So to answer the question, there is no specific mental illness that has to be present for you to engage in domestic violence or be the recipient of domestic violence. It is coming from broken people who break people.
Wow.
And I also think it's really important to recognize that domestic violence is about power and control. Drinking, doing drugs, they do not cause domestic violence. As does mental illness does not cause domestic violence. Now, it could exasperate it. It could cause it to go further than it was intended, but it's not the reason for domestic violence. Domestic violence is exerting power and control over one person doing it over another person. If you think about it, not everybody that gets drunk hits anybody.
That's right.
Not everybody that has a mental illness is going to beat up their partner. So you have to realize it's a level that exasperates what domestic violence is, but it does not cause domestic violence, and neither does alcohol, and neither do drugs.
Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down, Amy, clarifying. Now, we do want to continue with our viewer questions. Someone has asked, what is the evidence for domestic violence? And anyone can chime in here.
Evidence as it relates to court can be lots of things. Evidence can be as simple as your testimony about what happened to you, but evidence can obviously include pictures of injuries that you've sustained. Medical records are very useful forms of evidence that a person may have. Certainly third-party witnessing domestic violence incidents. So if someone actually called the police because they heard something, they heard a loud noise, they saw someone, grab someone and throw them to the ground. Those are all places where what we call and consider evidence when it comes to presenting that in a court situation, whether that be in a criminal court situation or whether that is in a civil court like a divorce. I take pictures, I take my client's own testimony, I take police reports to divorce court all the time as a means to show evidence of the pattern of domestic violence perpetrated against my client so that we can get the relief that we're seeking from that court.
And it's really important, document. As Maisha said, take pictures, keep a journal. If there's stalking involved, keep a stalking log. There is a toolkit on our website, on the Coordinating Council's website, that has a bunch of information on there about domestic violence, what you need to take when you leave, how to document things, and you can go to our website and download that toolkit, and it has all the information on it. But it's really important to tell, even if you tell somebody, if something happened and Jasmine, I call Jasmine and say, hey, my boyfriend, did something, and so that somebody else knows as well because domestic violence thrives in silence, and what we want to do is get it out there, and it's not. You shouldn't be ashamed or you shouldn't be blamed because you're in this situation, but we need to shine a light on it. We need to get it out there, and we need to make it that it's wrong for domestic violence, but let's not hide it in shame to do it.
Yeah. Well, we had another question that came in. These are all really helpful tips, ladies. Someone else writes, are protective orders effective? How does a piece of paper actually stop an abuser?
Right. I have heard that my whole entire career, that it's just a piece of paper. That is not true, statistically speaking. And the FBI has done studies on protective orders across the United States.
Oh, wow.
Protective orders and restraining orders and how they impact people in a positive way. here's what happens. You go to court, you hire an attorney, or you have the prosecutor on your behalf filing this legal document. Most of the people who are responding to protective orders are not wanting anyone to know that they're committing domestic violence. Once that secret is out, they're going to retreat. And so oftentimes, taking those affirmative steps to get a protective order is an opportunity for you to shame or push back the abuser in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if you kept it in secret, if you kept it hidden from the public. You get the police involved, you get a court involved, you get an attorney involved, and that changes the dynamics drastically for the survivor, which means that protective order is working. So that exposure is enough in some instances, not all, because certainly people do violate protective orders. Certainly leaving a relationship is a very dangerous time. And you do have to give notice that this lawsuit is being filed. So affirmative steps to keep yourself safe while you're pursuing a protective order should also be considered. Safety planning, you'll hear us say this over and over again, is a real thing. And so you need to have a plan to leave. You need to have a plan to pursue getting a protective order, all so that you can keep yourself safe. But they are generally effective once you have stepped into that arena and made those steps to get a protective order for yourself and your children.
And those protective orders are public, so anyone can access it. So it really speaks to your point about exposing the abuser and flipping the shame, if you will, on them. So that's also how it can work, I would imagine.
Yes, but I've heard that, doesn't stop a bullet, absolutely true, but it changes the dynamics substantially enough that it keeps people safe.
And it's in order to get a protective order, you have to find that there's been domestic violence. So there is a judge saying, we have found that there's a domestic violence in this relationship. And so it kind of validates the victim, like, I told you that this has happened.
And I believe you.
And I believe you. And it tells the offender, somebody's watching you. Someone's holding you accountable. And so they are a piece of paper, but they can work.
Hold so much weight.
I would also like to say, on a mental or a psychological level, for the abuser, fear is always there. And so one thing about fear is it's going to tell you the worst case scenario only. It's never going to tell you the in between. It's never going to tell you the positive. It's always going to tell you the worst case. So your fear will say, well, what if I, do this protective order and he or she just has a fit and and it's possible, I won't take that away, but recognizing fear is going to tell you the worst case scenario, to have you stay in a familiar space because that feels safe for fear.
All good points, Jasmine. Thank you. So next question from a viewer: what age does domestic violence usually start in an intimate partner relationship?
It can start as soon as someone starts dating. I was talking to a prosecutor in another jurisdiction, and he has a case where a 15-year-old killed his girlfriend. So I mean, it can, as soon as there is a relationship, it can start. When you look at the Texas Council on Family Violence's Honoring Texas Victims, which is a list of it's a report about domestic violence homicides in Texas. I think the youngest one this year was, I believe, 13, and then it went all the way up to someone in their 90s. So it's like there's a whole gamut, but it starts at the beginning. And the best thing to do is when you have a teen and they start dating and they start getting into relationships, is to sit down and talk to them
before they start dating.
That was our next question.
Long before they start dating.
You talk to them about consent. You talk to them. I mean, I've had a conversation when my nephew was 4. I had a conversation with him about consent. You talk about consent starting young. You talk about trusting your gut. You talk about what are the red flags? Like, what is a healthy relationship? You talk about different things.
Their level.
For their level.
Yes.
It's not texting 24/7. It's not, being constantly connected to that person. It's not them walking you to class and holding your hand and dropping you off and waiting for you. It's not them waiting outside your job. It's not them. I don't know if people still have lockers these days, but standing outside their locker, waiting for you. It's do you still can you still have friends?
Yeah.
But just being open and honest with your teen, and the most important thing as a parent is to be that person's safe person. Is that tell your child, no matter what you do, whatever, you can always talk to me, and it's important to make sure that they don't hide anything, and look for signs, look for marks on their hand when they're hiding something, or when they're wearing long sleeves and it's hot outside. Check for the signs and talk to your children.
Jasmine, how can parents actually talk to their teens? I know she mentioned depending on the age and level, but how does that tough conversation get started?
Being that safe space, because here's the thing, kids now, I won't say kids, adolescents are wearing hoodies in the summer anyway, right? You see during adolescence, they are staying in their rooms more often, right? And that may be because they're experiencing domestic violence, but it also may be because they're, gaining their autonomy and they're, enjoying whatever they're doing in their room. So the talking piece looks like casual conversation.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be this, especially for an adolescent, let's sit and talk.
Right.
Because it's like, oh God, right?
Yeah.
But it has to be comfortable, right? Like if something pops up on TV, like, oh man, that's crazy. Like, do you have any friends who've ever done that?
That's good.
Start with the friends, right? Oh yeah, I know this one girl, her boyfriend does this. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Then we have a conversation, right?
That's a good example.
Don't put the spotlight on them right away, right? Because they are going
segue
to
into it. I like that.
And you can also use reality television.
Yes.
Look at
Love Island and
There's a lot of that on those shows.
Or you can look at reality television. Like you can watch a reality television show, and that can spark conversations between you and your kids about
That's so true.
about any of the dating shows that are out there, or anything that's out there. But hey, is that something that you would think would be good in a relationship, or something like that? Or even if you can talk about what's happening in the news. I mean, there's lots of celebrities that do a lot of stuff that especially nowadays, that are going on, and you can talk to them about that and use those examples as either a good example or a bad example.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so our next viewer mentioned they wanted to know, how does mental and emotional domestic violence affect a young woman with kids?
So when you take into account that we have children, especially if the mother or father is the mother and father of those children, in this case it's a woman, you start to see a lot more people stay for the kids, right? This will be so much for the kids, and
thinking it'll get better, I'm sure.
And what I say to that is, you have to choose your discomfort. You and your children are either going to be uncomfortable
in that home
indefinitely, right? Or we're going to go through the discomfort of leaving this home, adjusting to a new life, the change, but that is more temporary, right? And so it does take an emotional toll, but you don't want to lie to yourself. If you are afraid to leave, you are afraid to leave, and that is okay, right? We can talk about that. But when you get to a space where you're like, oh, but for the kids, what are the kids really experiencing? If they were in front of a therapist and they said, what do you learn from relationships by looking at your parents, what would they tell their therapist, right? Because they are little sponges. They are taking it all in. Okay, when dad gets mad, this is what mad looks like. Got it. When mom gets upset, this is what she does. Got it, right? And so they are taking mental notes. You're not hiding anything from a child. They observe everything and they misinterpret most things, right? So I observe that they're arguing, and then I misinterpret that I just got in trouble because they're at odds with each other. It's something I did, right? Kids always are going to put it on themselves. Always. And so they're fighting because I asked dad for candy when mom told me no, right? It's going to be them. So whether you recognize the mental damage that it's causing or not, it's definitely there, and you will see it as they start to get in friendships, relationships, that type of thing.
And it's also important to realize too that a lot of times kids will step in to prevent their mother or their father from being hurt. We have a lot of instances where children are the victims. They, whether the perpetrator like shot, and it missed the mom but hit the kid.
Sure.
We've had instances where the perpetrator was swinging wildly and hit the child. Or that the mom was holding a child and the child got hit. So even though you think we're only fighting when they're in bed, they can hear.
They can hear it.
And they still have to function, and they still have to go to school and do everything that they have to do as a kid to be a kid, like to go to school and things like that. But how can they go to school and how can they function at school when they stayed up all night because they heard their parents fighting, or they had to protect their mom, or they had to protect their dad? So it's important to remember that what you're doing, they see.
Yeah. And they're seeing everything now. Maisha, we wanted to go to your biggest advice that you can give someone watching right now who is in a domestic violence situation.
My biggest advice is that there are so many resources available to anyone who's experiencing domestic violence. They need to recognize that they are not alone, even if that's what they feel. They are not alone, and that they should reach out, even if it's a phone call, even if it's a text, to our agency. 713-224-9911 is our main number, and we are avda.org. We have resources to help people just answer questions about safety planning, about leaving, about what your legal rights are. Just recognizing that you do not have to go through this by yourself.
Yeah.
And it's important too, there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You can call that number or text that number, and they can give you resources
all over the country.
And so it's just, if you can remember that. Also 211 here in Houston, the United Way helpline can also connect you to domestic violence, local resources and things like that. So there's a lot of resources that are out there. But the most important thing to remember is that the strongest person we know is a domestic violence survivor. They did whatever they had to do to survive. We don't want any more statistics like we saw in the piece that kicked this all off. We don't want any more homicides. We don't want any more grieving families. So whatever that person is doing to survive this situation, we need to respect that, because the person that's an expert on them is themselves. Yeah. And so what looks like what I might not do, what Jasmine might not do, what Maisha might not do, doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that they're surviving. Yeah. So we need to be there to support whatever that looks like, whether they stay, whether they go, whether they get a protective order, whether they go to therapy. We need to be there to support them, and they need the support and the support system to believe them, to recognize it, to believe what they say, and then help them get resources.
Yeah. To piggyback off of what Amy said, I want to speak to the support system. And, oftentimes we don't believe what they say, but even more often maybe, we just give this in your face, you need to leave. You need to leave. And that creates more shame. I feel stupid because I still love them and I'm not sure if I can leave. And so what happens, I can't keep bringing this conversation to them. They're going to keep telling me I need to leave. I feel humiliated. And so being mindful of how you support this person. I hate that you're experiencing this. How can I help you? Yeah. What do you need from me? I'm here, right? So that even if they don't leave for another 2 or 3 years, they feel safe enough to loop back around to you and say, hey, is that option still out there for the help? You know, that's something that's really important. Also for the person being abused, ask yourself, can I see myself doing this for another 12 months? Yeah. Can I see myself doing this for another 5 years? If your answer is no, it's never going to be easy to leave. Right. If you're waiting for that moment where they let you go or it's going to be easy to believe, you will be waiting for another 12 months, for another 5 years, right? And so you have to do it, as I call it, brave scared. You're scared, but be brave about it as best you can. And so that's something to keep in mind. I hear all the time like, well, why don't they just let me go? Why do they have to let you go, right? You don't need permission, right? And there's a control piece that has taken hold of psyche and emotional state, but ask yourself, can I let my kids go through this for another 5 years? If you're like, no, I can't, we have to start thinking about what it looks like to make an exit.
But how do we hit home, especially for those who are still holding out that their abuser could change, that they might not have a year, they might not have another 5 years. This could be life or death.
Yes.
How do we stress that time is ticking in some of these situations?
So we haven't talked about this, but there is some lethality assessments that are available. We use them to try to get the point across as to how dangerous your situation is. And there are some signs. So for example, if you are in an abusive relationship already and you've attempted to leave and you've returned, if you are with an abuser who has threatened to kill you or kill himself, if you're with an abuser who has easy access to a gun, because that is generally the choice of weapon that a perpetrator will use to do a homicide or intimate partner homicide, if there has been strangulation or choking in your relationship, and I'm asking these questions to a person. If they're saying yes, 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 your risk for harm and lethality is much higher than someone who is not getting yes to those particular questions. And so that's another opportunity. Reach out. Ask someone to do a lethality assessment with you to determine if your situation is so dangerous that you might be at risk for fatality due to domestic violence. And there is a difference. So making sure that people understand that, the viewers who are out there understand that there are people who are in domestic violence relationships and there are levels to how safe they might be on any given day. And some people are closer to a lethality situation than others are.
And most agencies will use, when you call in, most agencies will use the danger assessment or other type of lethality assessments to help you determine what your plan is going to be.
So they're available to help there
right.
too. Thank you so much. Yes.
Exactly.
You know, we could really talk about this topic
All day.
all day.
Yeah.
And we appreciate our panelists for really weighing in. This has been such an informative conversation that we need to continue to have. But before we go outside of the organizations our panel work with, here are some other resources available in our area. You can reach out to any of these organizations listed on your screen right now. The Houston area Women's Center and Family, the Crisis Center there, their services are free and confidential. We also have links to these organizations on our website, KHOU.com. You can also text at 713-526-1111 and we'll send you a link back with a list of those resources. The biggest message today, you are not alone. There are people here to help. As you can see, they're right here. Thank you to our incredible panelists for taking the time out to stay with us here today. And if you missed this part of our important conversation, you can rewatch it at any time on our KHOU 11 Plus app. I'm Ngo Chialoka. Thanks for joining us.